So before I begin this response, I'd like to first of all say a few notes about Stefan Molyneux and his A Truth About series, mostly because I try and keep the bits I'm quoting relatively short, just to make sure that I'm not just filling up the video with the person I'm responding to talking as opposed to myself. And this observation comes from something I can't exactly quote specifically, although I probably could, but I've already deleted the beginning portion of this video, so I'm not going to go back and put in that much effort into this, especially since the video is really long. The video I'm responding to is really long. I'm not quite sure how long this will be, because I wrote notes a while ago, and I don't know exactly if I wrote notes on everything. Based on the notes I've got, though, it will be quite long. The Truth About series highlights the fact that Stefan Molyneux is so ridiculously cult-like. It is shocking, especially if you have recently read any actual philosophy. Going to Stefan Molyneux's Truth About series is just so weird, because all other philosophy doesn't need to tell you that it will shock you, and it will change your life, and you've been lied to, and you need to literally buy into his philosophy, or else you're living in the dark. Apart from maybe Plato, but then Plato is a bit culty too. I wouldn't be surprised if Steph was quite influenced by Plato, I'm not sure if he's read Plato, but I wouldn't be surprised if he has read Plato. I wouldn't be surprised if that has some subconscious influence on how he talks about philosophy and how he views philosophy. But yeah, I just wanted to say that the Truth About series is ridiculous, and it's scary, and it doesn't have that much academic credibility simply because it's always talking in these sort of cult-like political terms, and it's all sort of sensationalized. But I will be responding to the Truth About rape.
In the United States, until 1977, a culture that supposedly promoted and enabled rape actually sanctioned and approved of the execution of men who committed it.
So this takes me right the way back to when I was originally getting involved in politics, which would have been 2009-ish, when the BNP was a big thing in the UK, and lots of people were talking about how the UK was getting taken over and we needed to vote for the BNP in order to save ourselves from Islam or whatever. And I read the BNP's manifesto just to see exactly what they were saying, even though I already knew really that I was unlikely to agree with it. I thought, let's see what I can get away from it. And one of the things that it mentioned is that they should have the death penalty for rape. And obviously I dislike rape. I dislike the death penalty too, but if someone's really against rape, surely I would support that. But my immediate thought when someone says they support the death penalty for rape is they're probably misogynistic, at least on a subconscious level. And I'm using misogynist there to mean sort of harbouring ideas that are against women, not necessarily ideas that are directly hating women, but just things that make women's lives worse. And in this case, if you support the death penalty for rape, chances are the only definition you give for rape is an attack. So, you wouldn't define what is actually, considered rape by modern feminists as rape. And in that case, having the death penalty for rape is possibly indicates that people do enable rape, because it is defining rape as an attack. It necessarily excludes the idea that having sex with someone who's drunk or pressuring someone into having sex is rape. And in that sense, yeah, it does enable rape. You know, it's like saying, I'll give you an analogy. It's like if I said to a pro-lifer, a pro-lifer says, we live in a society where millions of fetuses or babies are killed, and therefore, you know, we live in a society that's against life. And I say, well, no, because for many years and in many countries still, we have the death penalty for murder. So how can we be against life? And of course, for the pro-lifer, that makes no sense, because it almost proves that point, that if there's a death penalty for murder, and people who commit abortion do not receive the death penalty, it follows that, by their definition, society actually does condone abortion. And likewise, Stefan Molyneux was saying there's a death penalty for rape, but people who pressure women into having sex do not receive the death penalty. And therefore, the society believes, presumably, that pressuring people into sex or having sex with a drunk person is not rape.
That is not a very smart move on the part of the patriarchy to enable the death penalty for rapists. It's hard to see how that is compatible with a culture that promotes and sanctions rape.
So there are kind of two things. First of all, Steph makes a pretty big flaw in reasoning by arguing, as many anti-feminists do, that the patriarchy is supposed to be some type of unified conspiracy that works for men. This is not the case. And it's impossible for a society to be entirely patriarchal, really, because it's subconscious, you know. No one is arguing, I don't think, that if men got together and came up with a system that was designed to specifically help men and make lives best for men to the detriment of women, that they could not come up with a system that was more sexist and male chauvinist than the current system. And you know, this is similar to the fact that just because Nazi Germany's fascist policies were much better for the capitalist owners of the means of production than modern social liberal democracies are now, it does not follow from that the modern social liberal democracies are not capitalist. You know, capitalism is defined as a system that broadly helps the owners of the private owners of the means of production. It isn't defined as a system that has a government that directly does things intentionally to benefit the private owners of the means of production, which is what we would call fascism. Likewise, no one is arguing that a patriarchy is a system where men get together and decide how to make life worse for women, and therefore no, society cannot really be entirely patriarchal. And it's going to be you know, you are going to find instances where things will not help men necessarily. And another point to consider in the same vein is that patriarchy, as I've mentioned before, hopefully, I'm not sure if I've mentioned it in the video or just in something else, but patriarchy is not cooperative, it is competitive. It is men competing with each other. And again, I'll use the example of capitalism. Capitalism is a system that enables private owners of the means of production to, you know, do all the things private owners of the means of production do in a capitalist system, but they do it in competition with each other. And likewise, patriarchy involves men competing with each other.
Rape was punishable by death in both Babylon and ancient Egypt. In Roman law, which is the foundation, of course, of modern-day Western law, rape was a capital crime.
This sort of enables me to segue into the second point I was going to make, which is that there is a lot of historical precedent to suggest that rape has been viewed as a property crime. You can look at people being paid compensation, not the women, but the husbands or fathers of women who have been raped because it's seen to devalue their property. So the idea that because society has the death penalty against rape, it must therefore have great respect for the integrity and bodily autonomy of women doesn't necessarily make sense. It could be it has respect for the rights of men as owners of women, and therefore doesn't want to see women defaced in that manner. It does not follow from that the society must view women favourably.
So rape was a capital crime even when a woman was unmarried, and so on, or infertile or old.
This again falls into the reality that it's impossible to have a society that is completely... Sorry, I'm trying to move forward. It's impossible to have a society that is completely patriarchal. Of course, you cannot have a law in, certainly in recent history, but even in Roman antiquity, that said that that was so obvious in how it regarded 50% of the population. If the law literally said, or literally had the effect of basically saying, if you're married and you're young and fertile and live with your father, then rape is bad, and if you're infertile or you don't have any male relatives to whom you could be of any value, then rape is fine. You wouldn't see that law because society isn't that transparent. The entire point of sociology is that society isn't that transparent. It doesn't mean that there isn't a problem just because, like I say, there isn't a secret committee of men getting together and coming up with the perfect laws to subjugate women. These are general trends, and they generally negatively affect women, and they generally positively affect men, or they're intended to at least. Now, there's not it's illogical to be like, oh, but these don't have the exact effect of negatively affecting women and positively affecting men. Well, of course, because the way that patriarchy developed had a lot of nuance, and the way patriarchy was maintained had a lot of nuance. You couldn't literally have people saying to women that they thought they were inferior, or that they thought that they were, just less than human, because that wouldn't work. If men were going to preserve their position in society, they would be more likely to come up with laws that had the illusion of helping women or being good for women.
The FBI defined rape as, quote, the carnal knowledge of a female forcibly and against her will.
I realise that there are feminists who do not think that the term rape should be redefined to include men. I think it should be. I think a lot of feminists, and certainly any feminist I would consider to be my allies, would. If a feminist said that she didn't support redefining rape to include men and she thought men could not be raped, then feminist or not, I would have nothing to do with her the second I found that out, until I assume it would be a she, could be a man, until they changed their position. Now, how exactly this relates to the patriarchy is to do with another reality, which is usually acknowledged by feminists, and I think kind of has to be acknowledged by anyone who's really thinking about life, which is that there is, of course, more than just male to female privilege in life. There's white privilege, but more importantly there is the privilege of those in government and the privilege of those with lots of power. Now, if you're in a position of relative power, you are quite unlikely to be raped, simply because you're likely to be married off into what could be considered the aristocracy, where women are more likely to be brought up with modesty and things like that, and therefore they're not as likely to pursue sex in quite the same way that they might actually lead to men getting raped. And male victims of rape is a part of social justice, and social justice hasn't really been a big thing until possibly even just 100 years ago, or maybe you could say 200, 300 years ago. The point is that it's not exactly shocking that it would take up until now for some issues concerning social justice to be redressed, as we can see with gay marriage and a lot of other things. So it's not necessarily because nobody cares about men that this hasn't been redressed. It's possibly just because nobody cares really about social justice. And certainly there's no reason why a bunch of powerful men who have historically acted the way they would be likely to spend time redefining rape laws to be more inclusive. That's just against the very idea of how the patriarchy is characterized. The patriarchy is characterized as a culture that rejects ideas of privilege, and it kind of enforces the idea of cultural oppression and things like that. It's not going to be the type of thing or the type of culture that is obsessed over how definitions may have negative effects on certain parts of society. So yeah, I don't see how the fact that rape wasn't defined to include men is an indictment against the theory of patriarchy or against feminism, because I think all feminists ought to care about redefining rape to include men.
So it turned out one of the three questions was, quote, have you had sexual intercourse when you didn't want to because a man gave you alcohol or drugs?
So of course we know what he's going to argue here. He's going to argue that everyone's had sex while drunk or on drugs, and therefore everyone would respond to this question with the affirmative. Well, the vast majority of people would respond to this question with the affirmative. However, the question isn't just have you ever had sex with someone while drunk. The question is, have you ever had sex with someone when you didn't want to while drunk or on drugs? And the statement, first of all, it's worth noting, this says when you didn't want to, meaning not just did you regret it afterwards or anything like that. It means that according to the woman's assessment, she didn't want to at the time. Now, yeah, you can question, are they giving an accurate assessment, blah blah blah, but at the end of the day it's a self-reported study, so you can question that aspect of the methodology, but there's nothing exactly wrong with the question, and I can pretty much guarantee that the other say 70-65% of women who have probably had sex while drunk didn't respond to the question with the affirmative, because they did not consider themselves to be having sex when they didn't want to.
And 40% chose to have sex with their, quote, rapist afterwards.
Having sex with somebody after they've raped you is functionally equivalent to having sex with somebody after they've been abusive to you in any regard, which is to say it isn't actually that uncommon. People have sex with their abusive partners all the time and continue to be in a relationship with them. And it isn't uncommon for people to rape their long-term partner, especially at a young age when their partner might not want to have sex, but they push it and they push it and they push it, and perhaps they're aggressive or something like that, and eventually they have sex, and it would be considered rape because of how much they've pushed it and forced it. And it isn't uncommon at all after that point for the two to remain in a relationship because of all the misinformation and ambiguity about rape, meaning that the person will doubt whether or not they've actually been raped at all, and they'll think, am I just overreacting, blah blah blah. It's the same reason, like I say, why many women, and to a degree men, although I think men might have slightly different reasons for remaining in abusive relationships compared to women. So women will often think, is he really a bad person, or did I just provoke him, or was I annoying, or, is one punch really an indication that we shouldn't be in a relationship? This same logic can easily apply to rape.
If I get drunk and drive a car, because let's say I was at a party and someone offered me some drinks, and then I took those drinks, went out while drunk and crashed my car, I am not a victim at that point.
The difference here being that nobody wants anybody to crash their car. Nobody wants Stefan Molyneux to crash his car. Well, maybe some people do. But it doesn't get anyone's rocks off for a woman to crash her car. And the argument against this analogy is simply statistical. The number of people who have intentionally given a woman a drink in order to ensure that she crashes her car because they really wanted her to crash her car is close to zero. The number of people who have given a woman a drink because they want to have sex with her, and they view giving her lots of drinks as a means to lower her barriers and make it easier for them to exploit her and have sex with her, is relatively huge.
I am not outside the realm of moral agency.
Who said anything about moral agency? There is a difference between moral agency and the ability to consent, and if you want an example of this, people under the age of 16 cannot consent, certainly to anyone over the age of 16, we know that much, but somebody under the age of 16 can rape. They can rape someone under the age of 16, someone younger than them, but they can also rape someone over the age of 16 if they use sort of forceful rape. If a 15-year-old ties up a 16-year-old and has sex with them, that is rape, even though the 15-year-old cannot consent. And likewise, if a drunk person is forceful and makes the initiative to have another person have sex with them, then despite the fact that we may not say that they could consent if the situation was reversed, we can still say that they are morally responsible for rape. There's moral agency and the ability to consent are not the same thing. You can be morally accountable while not having the ability to consent. Now, the majority of acts that we consider to be immoral require sufficient wherewithal to make conscious decisions. Now, I'm not saying that the fact that you do or don't have the ability to make conscious decisions makes the acts immoral. I'm saying that if you are so drunk that you cannot really remember anything, or you don't really know what you're doing, or anything like that, then you probably won't even be able to do those actions. You won't be able to do the immoral actions. You have to be slightly sober to decide to shoot someone while drunk. Because if you are completely drunk, chances are you would just fall apart or something like that. It's being raped is not a conscious decision, it's something that happens to you, whereas the car doesn't, encourage you to get in it, go on, you'll like it. Come on, please, get in the car. Come on. You don't want to look like a prude, do you? You've got to get in the car. If a car did that, then it would probably be debatable whether or not a drunk person is responsible for driving that car.
We end up with a rationally and morally absurd situation. I mean, Kafkaesque absurd situation, where if the man and the woman have been drinking, let's say the man offers the woman 2 drinks and the woman offers the man 2 drinks. Oh, I'll get this round. Oh, you get that round. And then they have sex. They are both raping each other.
I really have to make this very simple. If 2 people are drunk and have sex, then at least one person in that situation must have wanted to have sex. If one person wanted to have sex and the other person didn't want to have sex, then that's rape. It's that simple.
Although consideration of male victims is within the scope of the legal statutes, it is important to restrict the term rape to instances where male victims were penetrated by offenders. In other words, generally raped by other men. It is inappropriate to consider as a rape victim a man who engages in unwanted sexual intercourse with a woman.
I disagree with that definition. I think a lot of people should disagree with that definition. I don't think it relates to rape culture or feminism in the wider sense. It's an ad hominem attack on the idea of rape culture or the statistics of rape culture or anything like that. I won't say it's an ad hominem attack on the person being quoted. I've forgotten her name. I won't say it's an ad hominem attack on her, simply because I think, we've really got to go on as a character. But if it's intended to be a criticism of her ideas outside of that statement, then it isn't invalid.
Among men, rape includes oral or anal penetration by a male using his penis. It also includes anal penetration by a male or female using their fingers or an object. The study then defines a special category called, quote, being made to penetrate someone else, which provides the following clarification for cases involving men. Quote, among men, being made to penetrate someone else could have occurred in multiple ways. Being made to vaginally penetrate a female using one's own penis, orally penetrating a female's vagina or anus, anally penetrating a male or female, or being made to receive oral sex from a male or female. It also includes female perpetrators attempting to force male victims to penetrate them, though it did not happen.
Staff is going to make the argument that because these definitions are given, it implies that rape culture does not exist and is not a problem for women, and what he's doing here is he's quoting a lot of academia, and in doing this he's making a mistake in assuming that academia is always in line with the social norm, and this is broadly the exact opposite of the truth. A scholar defining rape some way has nothing to do with how our culture defines rape. The same way that if you look at what Marx says about society, or you look at what Stefan Molyneux says about society, these would not be taken as indications of what our actual society is like. It is functionally equivalent to me saying, Karl Marx says that we live in a society where capitalism is considered good and people support capitalism. However, Karl Marx says that capitalism is bad, so therefore we clearly don't live in a society where people think capitalism is good, because I found a scholar who disagrees. Just because you find a scholar who says that, who gives a certain definition of rape, it does not mean that this is how society views rape. Now, you might make the argument, well, she's a really influential scholar on rape, and I believe this is a really influential organisation regarding rape, and therefore it can be taken to mean or imply how society in the broader sense regards rape. However, the majority of society does not care about the academia surrounding rape, so you cannot infer how society views rape by looking at academia, because, I could have a conversation with a random person on the street and ask them how they define rape, blah blah blah, what do they, try and get an idea of how the broader society views rape. I doubt any of them would be like, oh, of course, feminist blah 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 is the influential scholar on rape, she defines it this way. No, they would base it on what they're told by media or what's implied by media and things like that. Let me give an analogy again. A problematic idea of when romantic male leads usually in films will force themselves upon a woman and it's considered to be romantic. If I ask a young woman how she would view a certain scene where a man forces himself on a woman without consent, she may say, oh, that's really romantic. Now, the fact that a lot of scholars may, especially scholars in the field of sociology, scholars in the field of how media views relations, blah blah blah, would say otherwise, is not really relevant to how that actually affects our culture and what it says about our culture, because unfortunately academia doesn't make up a large amount of our culture and our media. It's usually films, books, stories, music, and just things that people in the public sphere say, whether or not they have any sort of academic credibility.
Where is the outrage at the inequality? Well,
there's a problem in assuming that because there is no outrage, there is no disagreement. I personally would love for rape to be redefined to include men, and as I say, I'm sure a lot of feminists would too. Certainly the vast majority of them, because what you have to remember about feminists, and this is something a lot of people forget, is that there are a lot of people who just live their day-to-day 9-to-5 job probably doing nothing to do with feminism that still identify as feminists. And the reason they're not outraged about these problems that Stefan Molyneux has to dig really deep to find is because they aren't necessarily involved in that type of stuff. So, you know, when you think about the number of people who identify as feminists, certainly the majority of them undoubtedly do oppose this definition. But firstly, is it the biggest problem in the world? Maybe not. That isn't to say it shouldn't be addressed, and I think that in an ideal situation it would be addressed. You know, I'm not arguing just because there are big problems it shouldn't be addressed. I'm arguing that simply an explanation for why it isn't addressed, not why it shouldn't be addressed. You know, it's not surprising that it doesn't get published as much when feminism doesn't have that much of a massive media presence and cultural presence today. And when it does, it's usually on niche issues. You know, there's very few people going around advocating the official, inclusive feminist position on every single issue, which is unfortunate, and I would like it if people did do that, and there were people out there to set the record straight. But until there are, you know, in the sound bites and the interviews on specific topics that feminists are likely to be argued to, you're not going to see that many feminists be able to voice their opinion on the definitions of rape and how this negatively affects men.
According to feminists, drinking or getting high impairs one's cognitive performance and therefore renders the women unable to consent to sex, turning any man who has sex with her into a rapist.
Just at the point, contextually, it's pretty obvious what people mean when they say drunk. And, you know, it's like if I say I was drugged, I don't mean I had an aspirin tablet. I mean, I was drugged. And if I say I was drunk, I don't mean I had a few drinks. If I'm saying I was raped because I was drunk, then the presumption would be from that I was drunk enough to be raped. It wouldn't be that I hardly drank anything at all and then had completely consensual sex and then was told that is defined as rape and said I was raped. That would be ridiculous.
Interestingly enough, recent studies have found that unlike heterosexual women, heterosexual men's cognitive performance is actually impaired. You are lust drunk after an interaction with someone of the opposite sex. In fact, the impairment of cognitive performance occurs even if a man thinks he's talking to a woman or merely anticipates an interaction with her. So if cognitive impairment resulting in rape is the result, then in a weird way, they're right.
I was considering leaving this because it doesn't bear refuting and just, you know, cutting it out entirely, but I just figured I'd leave it in there because I found it funny in a ridiculous kind of way.
Now, before we get into this slide, I wish to reiterate that legally, morally, and philosophically, all mentally competent adults are responsible for their own actions. So this is not designed to take away the moral responsibility of rapists of either gender. The fact remains that researchers have estimated that between 60 and 80% of rapists, sex offenders, and sexually aggressive men were sexually abused by a woman in their childhood. This is part of the cycle of violence that we really need to focus on. There is, of course, a role for punishment and isolation of rapists within society. There is a very significant role for prevention. A study from 1989 found that male adolescent incest offenders abused by females only targeted female siblings 93.3% of the time, compared to 32.5% for offenders abused only by males. So if you are sexually abused as a child, when you are an adolescent, you will target female siblings 3 times more often than if you're sexually abused by a male. A meta-analysis, which is the aggregation and consolidation of data from a variety of studies, a meta-analysis of 17 studies found that sex offenders were 3.4 times more likely to have experienced sexual abuse in their childhood compared to non-sex offenders. And there was no difference between the two groups in terms of physical abuse. In other words, childhood sexual abuse was significantly correlated with becoming a sexual offender later in life. Teach men not to rape, in other words, doesn't work. Empathy cannot be taught. It is developed in childhood and shaped by parents. It is now time to answer the question we asked earlier. How prevalent is rape? Feminist lawyer Catherine McKinnon famously proclaimed that, quote, by conservative definition, rape happens to almost half of all women at least once in their lives. What does the data say? Before we dive into the actual numbers, I have to point out that men are significantly underrepresented in the data we're going to cite and use for our estimates. We, of course, have already highlighted the unbelievable sexist prejudice as to why that is the case. As of 2013, the FBI defines rape as, quote, penetration, no matter how slight, of the vagina or anus with any body part or object, or oral penetration by a sex organ of another person without the consent of the victim. Well, do you see what is missing here? It's the usual thing. Men cannot be raped. Now, gender references are removed in this definition and the wording is more accurate, but penetration, no matter how slight, of the vagina or anus with any body part or object, vagina, it's women only. Nobody thought to include being made to penetrate or envelopment as rape categories. Again, it's still very early. We have, as men, yet to achieve what ancient law extended as protections to women, which is a recognition of rape and the evils of being subjected to rape. Sooner or later, maybe in the 22nd century, we will catch up with, say, 5000 BC for men. So there's a more inclusive definition in place, so activists, of course, expected a dramatic rise in the number of reported rapes. According to the legacy definition, there were about 80,000 rapes in America in 2013. Using the new revised definition, the number of rapes increases to approximately 109,000, which is a rate of one rape per 2,900 persons, both male and female. Of course, the increase is not insignificant, but this number, these data, does not support the notion of pervasive rape or rape culture in the United States. However, since the agency calculates its estimates based only on reported crimes, the Bureau of Justice Statistics supplements the FBI's data with the largest crime survey in the US, the National Crime Victimization Survey. So let's take a look at the survey's report on rape for 2013. The survey defines rape as, quote, forced sexual intercourse, and includes both psychological coercion as well as physical force. Forced sexual intercourse means vaginal, anal, or oral penetration by the offenders. This category also includes incidents where the penetration is from a foreign object such as a bottle. So in this way, really, the major weapon is the penis. It cannot be the vagina in terms of made to penetrate or envelopment. Missing every single time. Out of a random sample size of over 180,000 people, how many would you imagine would report being raped or being victims of attempted rape? Out of a random sample size of over 180,000 people, 27 reported being raped and 10 were victims of attempted rape. So based on these reports, we calculate that in 2013, there were about 91,000 incidents of rape and about 30,000 attempted rapes. This number of rapes is lower than the FBI estimate, which is problematic. Given how few people report sexual violence, the statistical significance of 1 or 2 incidents is actually quite large. However, the survey also estimates that on average, between 2008 and 2012, about 60% of rapes were not reported. Using FBI's data and accounting for unreported incidents, we calculate that there were a little over 270,000 rapes in the United States in 2013. This means that in total, about 0.1% of the US population experienced rape or attempted rape for that year. Now, since of course all surveyed people were 12 years of age or older and the average lifetime expectancy in the US is 79, we can estimate a 6% probability of being raped in a 67-year period. And this correlates. A national telephone survey in the US conducted between 2001 and 2003 found that about 6.7% of US adults have been forced to have sex during their lifetime. Now, of course, the calculated probability is exaggerated because it assumes an equal likelihood of being raped for a person in his 20s or her 20s and another in his or her 70s. It also assumes that people never ever lie about being raped. Furthermore, since sexual violence rates have been declining for the last few decades, the rape probability will be lowered over those 67 years going forward. It's also important to point out that these risks of rape are not spread evenly across the population. People coming from different socioeconomic and ethnic backgrounds will not experience the same rate of rapes and rape attempts. So as a final measure of rape prevalence, we're going to average the results from the National Crime Victimization Surveys between 2008 and 2013 to account for variation in rape estimates. The average rate of rape victimization for this 6-year period is 25.3 per 100,000 people. For comparison, the FBI reports a 2013 rate of 25.2 under its legacy definition and 34.4 under its revised definition. Using this new estimate, the lifetime probability of experiencing rape or attempted rape is 2.5%. Once again, this probability is subject to the previously outlined limitations. Now, according to the CDC study, 92% of female rape victims were raped by an intimate partner or an acquaintance. 92% of female rape victims were raped by an intimate partner or an acquaintance. You need to stick this number in your head because we'll be using it going forward. Now, even if we assume only one offense per rapist, this means that the lifetime probability of being raped by a stranger is 0.1%. 0.1%. There are some estimates that say that the average rapist commits several offenses. Of course, that would be most likely. The other thing, of course, is that a man who is willing to rape, and there's not enough data to figure out what the case is with women, but a man who is willing to rape is almost invariably associated with other kinds of violence, domestic abuse, abuse of others, fights, assaults, and so on. And so it's not like nice boys who then turn dark and weird in the middle of nowhere. In general, rapists have other markers of violence and histories of, let's just say, brushes with the law, to say the least. So which rape estimate is the most accurate? It's important to highlight the fact that in the 08 to 13 period, the National Crime Victimization Survey counted only 118 reports of rape and 60 reports of attempted rape after surveying nearly 1.1 million people. Let's remind you of those numbers. 1.1 million people surveyed, 118 reports of rape and 60 reports of attempted rape. The sample size of this survey is over 10 times the sample size of the CDC study, and it doesn't count instances of sex while intoxicated as rape. On the other hand, the CDC study attempted to maximize the possibility of disclosure through practices such as conducting phone instead of in-person interviews. However, its methodology when reporting rape, and male rape in particular, is questionable to say the least. As one author put it, quote, "Up until this report, the CDC could be relied upon to present such data in an unbiased, non-sexist manner. Now, with this report, summary statements must be examined as possibly suspect." So, what about lying or to put it more charitably, being mistaken. Now, before we dive into this, important to remember, since 9 out of 10 women are raped by someone they know, then it's not likely that they're going to be mistaken, right? If you've known a guy named Bob and then you say that Bob rapes you and it turns out that you're wrong or mistaken or whatever, that's probably a lie. Now, some guy jumps you in the bushes, he's got a balaclava on and you only hear his voice and whatever, right? And then you make a mistake, pick him out of a lineup or whatever, that's a different matter. But since the vast majority of female rape victims know their rapist, in fact, in one survey, the use of violence outside of knowledge of the victim was almost non-existent. In other words, the only time that a roofie was used was when the rapist did not know his victim. And every time the rapist knew his victim, that's when violence was used or intoxicants. Since the 1970s, one of the most prevalent claims is that only 2% of rape accusations are false. One researcher decided to investigate the origin of this statistic and found that the primary source was a popular book written by American feminist Susan Brownmiller called Against Her Will: Men, Women, and Rape. It turned out that Brownmiller got the number from a judge's speech, where the commander of New York City's rape analysis squad was quoted with this figure. Not only is there no data or report available as the source of this information, but the squad itself appears to have lacked any training in statistical analysis. At best, the 2% statistic is unverifiable. However, that didn't stop it from becoming one of the official estimates of false rape accusations that feminists use. Another popular estimate comes from a 1996 FBI report, which reads, quote, "The unfounded rate or percentage of complaints determined through investigation to be false is higher for forcible rape than for any other index crime. 8% of forcible rape complaints in 1996 were unfounded, while the average for all index crimes was 2%. Unfounded accusations aren't necessarily false, so this report is rather useless in establishing the truth. However, the FBI's estimates are too low. As Newsweek reported back in 1993, quote, "A third of the DNA scans now routinely done in new rape investigations are non-matches." In other words, DNA samples from hair, semen, or blood found on the victim didn't match the DNA of the suspect. Again, it is impossible to establish how often the women lied or were mistaken. What is interesting is that in the 1960s, the FBI reported that 20% of rape reports were unfounded. A decade later, that number dropped to 15%. By the 1990s, it was below 10%. So as the feminist movement grew, the numbers just changed. Given how controversial the topic of false rape allegations is, very few independent studies have been conducted to establish the percentage of women who lie about being raped. Back in the 1990s, Alan Dershowitz, a lawyer and prominent scholar in U.S. law, was, quote, "accused of sexual harassment for discussing in class the possibility of false rape allegations." Dershowitz later refused to give lectures on rape without videotaping them and remarked that, quote, "legal experts in the field had just decided not to teach rape law rather than take the risk." Attorney Jonas Spilbor provides a good argument for why we shouldn't ignore false rape accusations. Quote, falsely reporting any crime is shameful. Falsely reporting a rape is especially heinous. The liar who files the false rape claim dishonors and makes life all the more difficult for the many true victims who file genuine rape claims because they have been terribly violated and seek justice for it. At the same time, and perhaps even more seriously, the false report begins to destroy the reputation and sometimes the life of the accused from the very moment it is made, a fact of which many accusers are keenly aware. In the recent allegations one was published in Rolling Stone about a reported rape by 7 men in a frat house against a woman who apparently was hit on the head, smashed down on a glass table, and repeatedly raped with broken glass cutting into her back and so on. It appears that this story has significant problems in that there was no party that weekend, and the details that were provided don't match anyone there. And Lena Dunham, in a recent book that she wrote, is under some legal heat for identifying a prominent campus conservative named Barry in her book without putting the asterisk which she uses elsewhere to say that it's a pseudonym. And what I've read in the reports of these incidents is that it makes life more difficult for women who come forward with allegations. I've not actually read once about how difficult it's made life for the men. This, again, is why the idea of patriarchy is so ludicrous. Over the years, many researchers, of course, have found that if they want to keep their jobs, they should stay away from the topic. I mean, if a feminist could accuse them of sexual harassment or worse, this is why most of the research on the topic is several decades old. In the 1970s, when the anti-rape culture feminist movement was taking off, a group of researchers who had observed the clash between feminists and authorities decided to investigate the prevalence of false rape accusations as opposed to unfounded ones. The head of the research group noted, quote, "Currently, the two main identifiable adversaries involved in the false rape allegations controversy are the feminists and the police. The feminists are by far the most expressive and prominent on this issue. Some feminists take the position that the declaration of rape as false or unfounded largely means that the police do not believe the complainant. That is, the rape charges are real reflections of criminal assault, but the agents of the criminal justice system do not believe them. Some feminists virtually deny the existence of false rape accusations and believe the concept itself constitutes discriminatory harassment toward women. On the other hand, police are prone to say the reason for not believing some rape complainants resides in the fact that the rapes never occurred." Between 1978 and 1987, some researchers investigated rape reports in a small metropolitan area with a population of about 70,000 people. Over the course of 9 years, they found that in 41% of rape cases, the complainant admitted that no rape had occurred, and the accusation was false. The average age of women who made false accusations was 22, and the majority came from lower socioeconomic and educational backgrounds. The researchers determined that the, quote, false rape charges were able to serve three major functions for the complainants: providing an alibi, a means of gaining revenge, and a platform for seeking attention/sympathy. What is also interesting is that in those 9 years, there were only 109 rape accusations. Even if 45 of the 109 accusations were proven to be false, that doesn't necessarily mean that the rest were all true. However, if we assume that they were, the women in this town experienced, on average, about 7 actual rapes per year. Based on our previous calculation, this amounts to an exaggerated 0.7% lifetime probability of being raped, or 1.7% if we assume only 40% of rapes get reported. The researchers followed up this study with an examination of 2 large Midwestern state universities and found that 50% of rape allegations were false. Their report stated, quote, "Approximately 1/2, or 53%, of the false charges were verbalized as serving an alibi function. In every case, consensual sexual involvement led to problems whose solution seemed to be found in the filing of a rape charge. The complaints motivated by revenge, about 44%, were of the same seemingly trivial and spiteful nature as those encountered by the city police agency. These unanticipated but supportive parallel findings on university populations suggest that the complications and conflicts of heterosexual involvements are independent of educational level. In fact, we found nothing substantially different here from those cases encountered by our city police agency." In other words, women from all backgrounds can lie about being raped. In the 1980s, researchers in the United States Air Force Special Studies Division examined 1,218 reports of rape that were made on Air Force bases throughout the world in the 1980 to 1984 period. Quote, "Proven allegations due to, quote, overwhelming preponderance of the evidence comprised 38% of reported rape, 460 allegations in total. Of the remaining cases, 212, or 17%, were deemed disproved after the accuser convincingly admitted to lying about being raped. The researchers then investigated the remaining 546 unresolved rape allegations, examining evidence and having the accusers submit to a polygraph test. In total, 27% of investigated accusers admitted to fabricating their accusations prior to taking the polygraph test or after failing it. If there was any doubt, the case was classified as proven. Ultimately, the study found that 45% of rape allegations were false. Accusers who lied were also asked why they did it. Here's a breakdown of the replies. Spite or revenge, 20%. To compensate for feelings of guilt or shame, 20%. Ooh, thought she might be pregnant, 13%. To conceal an affair, 12%. To test husband's love, 9%. Mental or emotional disorder, 9%. To avoid personal responsibility, 4%. Failure to pay or extortion, 4%. Thought she might have caught a venereal disease, 3%. Other, 6%. Since 1988, no new studies on the subject have been conducted. To demonstrate women's capacity or propensity to lie, let's take a look at divorce cases where women lie to gain advantage in court, or to get back at their husbands, or to win custody rights. In the 1980s, when divorce rates were skyrocketing, this started in the 1970s, the percentage of US divorce cases where the woman accused her husband of child sexual abuse increased from 7% to 30%. It was such a phenomenal explosion of sexual violence accusations that the practice became known in legal circles as SAID, sexual allegations in divorce. Estimates for false accusations in those cases ranged from 20 to 80%. In a 1991 paper, two psychologists noted, quote, in over 500 cases of sexual abuse allegations where we have provided expert consultation over the past 6 years, 40% have been in divorce and custody disputes. Of the divorce and custody cases that have been adjudicated, in 3/4, there was no legal finding of abuse. Of the divorce and custody cases that have been adjudicated, in 3/4, in 75%, in 3/4, there was no legal finding of abuse. That is, charges were dropped, never filed, the person was acquitted in criminal court, or there was a finding of no abuse in family or juvenile court. I'll tell you something, my friends. People wonder about the sexodus, about men not wanting to get involved in women, in relationships with women. Look, a lot of men grew up in these time frames and saw what happened to their fathers at the hands of mothers and a criminal or family law court system. They have seen what happens. And this unbelievable fiery sword that is cleaving which should be united one heart of the genders. Men and women are designed to be compatible more than physically, emotionally, intellectually. A lot of these boys who went through these kinds of divorces where perhaps their fathers were falsely accused of sexual molestation by their mothers, how keen do you think these men are, after growing up, to get married? Here is a chilling parallel. I'll just leave you to mull this one over. I'll simply provide the facts and the correlation. Sorry if you're just listening to the audio. This is the reported rape rate per 100,000 from 1960 to 2011. As you can see, of course, from the peak in the early 90s, it has declined significantly from 5.5 to 3.5, so almost 40% down. That is the rape rate per 100,000. Let's also look at the divorce rate per 1,000. As you can see, it tracks very closely. The correlation, 1.0 being a perfect correlation, the correlation between reported rapes and divorces is 0.85, which is a very, very strong correlation. What about accountability for false rape accusations? Bruce Gross, director of University of South Carolina's Institute of Psychiatry, Law and Behavioral Science, points out the lack of accountability for making a false rape accusation. Quote, essentially, there are no formal negative consequences for the person who files a false report of rape. Although there are grounds for bringing legal action against the accuser, it's virtually never done. Even should a charge be filed, in most jurisdictions, filing a false report is only a misdemeanor. My particular way of thinking is that if you accuse someone of a crime and it turns out that you lied, you should get the punishment that the other person would be subject to. But that's just me, perhaps. Quote, when rape cases go to trial, alleged victims are protected by rape shield statutes. In brief, these statutes are designed to prevent defense attorneys from using the accuser's sexual history, quote, against her. At the same time, these rape shield laws may suppress evidence related to the woman's history that is relevant to the issue before the court. In particular, rape shield statutes have been used to exclude prior false accusations of rape filed by the alleged victim. So, if you are the fifth man that this woman has falsely accused of rape, in some cases, her prior admitted false rape accusations cannot be admitted to the court. How is it possible, really, if feminism is focused on equality between the genders, if feminism is focused on female responsibility and accountability, how is it possible after a century of feminism, you could go even further, back to vindication of the rights of women? How is it possible that the rape of men is still so unrecognized? How is it possible that after a century of feminism striving for equality between the genders, it was only in 2013 that the FBI even began expanding its definition of rape to include male victims? Why is it that major studies in the 21st century gloss over male rape or outright refuse to define it as rape? How is it possible that major feminist scholars on the issue of rape can say, basically, that men cannot be raped, except by other men? Feminists are supposedly fighting rape culture, but male victims of rape still have no voice. Why? Rape culture is supposed to be, of course, that which denies a voice to rape victims and normalizes rape. I mean, the anti-rape movement of the 1970s and 1980s, they were foundational to the rise of second-wave feminism and all of its associated political and legal power. Victimhood and the leverage it provides was how this power was achieved. There's a reason why the rape of women is an elemental and primal part of wartime propaganda. Feminist Marilyn French wrote in a novel that became a New York Times bestseller in the late 70s, since sold over 20 million copies, she wrote, all men are rapists, and that's all they are. Come on. Come on. Some black men steal. If we were to say all black men are thieves and that's all they are, would we consider that fair and just? Of course not. That would be shockingly racist. Men are now obliged to, when they go to college, they are obliged to sometimes attend compulsory don't rape seminars, consent seminars. Again, some black men steal. Should then all black men be singled out to take don't steal, mandatory don't steal courses when they come to university? How welcome would that make blacks feel in such a racist environment? It's appalling, absolutely shocking and appalling. Now, of course, quite recently, a number of states have begun enacting policies wherein a man must get explicit verbal approval for every step in the seduction process. Can I kiss you? Can I touch your ear? Can I unhook your bra? And you have to get yes for every single step of the way. But how is it not that women are also told that they must get verbal assent from men for every step of their seduction process? Again, And this doesn't really solve anything, because it simply becomes a he said. You could get verbal assent when you're alone from the woman, and then the next morning she might choose that it was not. She was too drunk. She was thinking about something else. She was stressed. She was distracted. She was unwell. And then the fact that you got verbal assent is still not proven, unless you're going to wear some body cam and record everything you do, which I understand is also illegal. So this is a horrendous mess in gender relations. And the reasons for that we can go into perhaps another time. It's a very specific targeting of a very specific group for very specific political purposes, which we've gone into before, and we don't have to extend this presentation in this way. Men are not dumb. We have a very good capacity to look at odds and statistics and to weigh the cost benefits of penis placement. Many of us grew up in divorced households and saw mothers, vengeful, bitter, angry, deceitful mothers, eviscerate our fathers through the court process, through the legal process, or through simply spreading wicked tales. Men know that the innocent until proven guilty standard of Western law, of common law, of Roman law, is largely thrown out, particularly in tribunals regarding rape that are conducted on college campuses. We know that almost every time you see a rape accusation portrayed in art or in the media, that it is accepted and foundational that the woman is telling the truth and that the men are evil. And therefore, when it comes to succumbing to the charms of women, it is a very dangerous business for men. A very dangerous business for men. Having sex with a woman, particularly a young woman, who has been indoctrinated into believing that she is literally surrounded by well-armed Stuka penises designed to blow her to smithereens at a moment's notice, is a very dangerous business. And that if she regrets the sex or has a problem with it, or turns out she has a boyfriend who finds out she has sex, she may run to the authorities and his life is destroyed. Destroyed. There are, of course, a small proportion of men and women who rape. This is terrible. This is horrifying. This is as evil a crime as can be imagined. And in many ways, many people think that it's worse than murder. And, of course, these people should be vigorously identified, prosecuted, incarcerated, opposed, ostracized, through whatever methodology can be developed. However, men and women who are biologically evolved to be compatible, to get along, we fit together not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, we should be the greatest team. A romantic love, a married love is one of the greatest gifts that nature, history, and biology has to offer men and women, and should be the firm foundation upon which children are raised into benevolent and happy and win-win negotiating productive people in the world, has been taking unbelievable blows over the past half century or so. This is to the detriment of society as a whole. It is to the detriment of children. It is to the detriment of happiness. And it scarcely can be said that women, middle-aged women in America, 40% of them are on antidepressants. It can scarcely be said that this has been beneficial to women's happiness as a whole. It certainly has made the relationship between the genders tense and fraught and confrontational and fearful. And this is a huge, unspoken, unacknowledged tragedy in the increasing politicization and political correctness of sexual relations. Women have, of course, generally been portrayed as mere helpless victims in this interaction. However, if 92% of women know they're rapists, then it's hard to say that they are pure victims in the matter, given that rapists, genuine rapists, come with a wide variety of markers for dysfunction and violence in other areas. This is not to blame women, but to say that women have no responsibility in protecting themselves against rape. Do not get drunk to blackoutness with people you don't know. If I go to some party in a bad neighborhood with $100 bills hanging out of my pocket, and I get drunk and I pass out, and I wake up to find that some of my money is gone, of course the people who took it are wrong. Yeah, of course they should go to jail, absolutely, or be prosecuted. But come on, if I told that story, wouldn't people say, well, that wasn't very smart now, was it? There are predators in the world, both male and female. And you need to take care of yourself. As Camille Paglia has pointed out, if a man or woman leaves his or her wallet on a park bench in Central Park for a week and come back and it's gone, of course the person who took it was wrong. But come on. Some elemental and basic self-protection is in order here. I am very keen that fewer men and women get raped. Call me a radical. I am very keen on helping people to not be raped. But if they are pure victims of randomness, if rape is lightning out of a clear blue sky that reaches you in the basement while you're napping, then you can't do anything to oppose it. You can't do anything to reduce its prevalence. And there are ways to reduce the prevalence of rape. There are very sensible things that people can do to reduce the prevalence of rape. Surely that is what we all want. And the portrayal of women as victims and the exclusion of men as even a category of rape victims does nothing to help reduce the prevalence of rape. So, I think it is tragic. I think it is horrifying. I think that the cloud of suspicion, paranoia, and hostility that has been sowed between the genders may very well be the literal undoing of Western civilization. But by getting the truth out, by finding out the truth about these situations, we can begin to undo the damage that radicals have done to naturally compatible hearts of men and women, and begin to love one another again as genders, while being fierce about those who violate the personhood of others. We can divide rationally, empirically, men and women into good and evil. Love the good, shun the evil. But if we willfully blind ourselves by exaggerating the prevalence of evil in either gender, we can no longer differentiate between who is our friend and who is our enemy, between who will love us and who will violate us. So we need the facts about prevalence. We need the facts about self-protection, because we can only love when we feel safe and secure. And exaggerating rape and minimizing false rape allegations means that we cannot feel secure. And this robs us of one of the greatest birthrights of being a human being, of being alive, which is the capacity for loving deep, intimate, and secure love and attachment. Let's fight back against these divisive elements, find the facts, fall in love, and be happy. This is Stefan Molyneux from Free Domain Radio. Thank you so much for watching.